Story number 1. Frozen Secrets in Nome. Moving to Nome, Alaska, was supposed to be the fresh start my wife, Emily, and I desperately needed. After years of living in the relentless bustle of Anchorage, the promise of a quiet, secluded life in a remote town was irresistible. Our new home was a charming, albeit old, two-story house nestled on the outskirts of Nome, surrounded by vast wilderness and untouched beauty. Little did we know, the house held secrets that would plunge us into a nightmare far colder than the Alaskan winters. From the moment we settled in, there was something unnerving about the basement. Regardless of how high we set the thermostat upstairs, the basement remained perpetually frozen, a stark contrast to the warmth above. Emily and I chalked it up to the house's age and poor insulation, convincing ourselves that, with time, the heating system would eventually conquer the basement's chill. However, as weeks turned into months, the basement's icy grip showed no signs of loosening, no matter how much we tried to warm it. One late winter afternoon, fueled by a mix of frustration and curiosity, Emily and I decided to tackle the basement's stubborn cold head-on. Armed with space heaters, insulation materials, and determination, we began a thorough renovation. The task was arduous, the freezing temperatures making every movement a struggle. But the thought of finally overcoming the basement's chill kept us going. As we cleared out old boxes and discarded debris, our efforts gradually began to bear fruit. The air grew less frigid, and the first signs of progress filled us with hope. It was during one of these intense cleaning sessions that Emily stumbled upon something extraordinary. A large, ornate chest partially buried under a thick layer of ice in a forgotten corner of the basement. "Look at this," she called out, her voice tinged with excitement and apprehension. Together, we knelt beside the chest, carefully removing the ice that encased it. The intricate carvings on the chest hinted at a bygone era, their details obscured by time and frost. With a mix of trepidation and fascination, I reached for the heavy latch, feeling the cold metal against my skin. The chest creaked open, revealing its macabre contents. Inside lay a mummified figure, preserved in a state that suggested deliberate effort. The man was dressed in clothing that seemed centuries old, his features frozen in a haunting stillness. His eyes, though lifeless, seemed to bore into my soul, sending shivers down my spine. "Who is he?" Emily whispered, her hand trembling as she held the photograph we found alongside the chest. The picture showed a young woman and a little boy, both smiling brightly, their eyes full of life. The date scribbled on the back read, 1924. Determined to uncover the truth, we delved into the house's history. Local archives and elderly neighbors revealed a tragic story. In the winter of 1924, the house had been the scene of a devastating fire. Eleanor Thompson, along with her young son, Thomas, had perished in the blaze. Rumors suggested that Eleanor, in a desperate attempt to save her child, had sealed the basement doors, leading to their untimely deaths. As the days passed, the basement's mysterious cold persisted. But the discovery of the chest and the photograph provided a grim connection to the house's past. One night, as the wind howled outside and the temperature plummeted further, I felt a sudden urge to return to the basement. The memories of that horrific discovery weighed heavily on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor and Thomas were still trapped within those icy walls. Armed with the photograph and a newfound resolve, I decided to confront the lingering spirits. I reached out to a local historian and a spiritual medium, hoping to find a way to help Eleanor and Thomas find peace. Together, we organized a memorial in the basement, placing the photograph and lighting candles to honor their memory. As the candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, the temperature in the basement seemed to shift. The oppressive cold lifted slightly, replaced by a serene stillness. The whispers that had haunted us began to fade, replaced by a comforting silence that felt like a weight lifted from the room. Feeling a sense of accomplishment, Emily and I returned upstairs, believing that we had finally eased the spirit's torment. However, our relief was short-lived. The following nights brought a new terror, footsteps echoing from the basement in the dead of night. The sounds were unmistakably human, rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone was pacing back and forth in the darkness below. Terrified, we decided to investigate. With the help of the medium, we returned to the basement once more. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, surrounding us like an invisible presence. The air was thick with tension, and the once clear path we had cleared was now obstructed by an inexplicable frost that hadn't been there before. "Stay calm," the medium instructed, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "We need to communicate with them," we called out, our voices trembling, but only silence answered us. Suddenly, the temperature dropped again, and the basement was plunged into an unnatural cold. I could see my breath misting in front of me, despite the heating efforts upstairs. The footsteps intensified, now accompanied by faint, sorrowful cries. Emily clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" she whispered. The medium began to chant softly, her words lost in the cacophony of the basement's new symphony of sounds. The photograph and candles seemed to glow with an ethereal light, the spirits of Eleanor and Thomas reaching out for the closure they desperately needed. Just as abruptly as it began, the storm of footsteps and cries ceased. The basement fell silent once more, the frost receding as quickly as it had appeared. A profound sense of peace settled over us, and the oppressive cold was replaced by a comforting warmth. Relieved, we knew that Eleanor and Thomas had finally found the peace they sought. The footsteps no longer echoed through the basement, and the house felt genuinely warm and inviting. However, despite our efforts, a lingering sense of unease remained, a subtle reminder of the house's dark past. Weeks turned into months, and the basement remained free of its former chill. Life in Nome settled into a comfortable routine, and the horrors of that winter began to fade into memory. But the peace was deceptive. Late one night, as I lay in bed, I felt an inexplicable presence watching over me. The house was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the heating system. Suddenly, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the basement. Slow and deliberate, my heart raced as I listened. Frozen in fear, the footsteps approached, stopping just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, trying to stay calm, but a chill ran down my spine. The next morning, I shared my experience with Emily, who was equally disturbed, determined to uncover the truth. We revisited the basement, but found nothing amiss. The footsteps remained a haunting enigma, a reminder that some mysteries are never fully resolved. One evening, driven by a need for answers, I decided to dig deeper into the house's history. I discovered that Eleanor Thompson had not been the only one to perish in the basement. Over the years, several other tragedies had occurred, their stories lost to time but their spirits lingering in the cold, forgotten corners of our home. Realizing that the basement was a nexus of unresolved sorrow, Emily and I sought the help of a renowned paranormal investigator. Together, we conducted a series of seances and cleansing rituals, honoring the memories of those who had suffered in our basement's icy grip. Slowly, the supernatural occurrences began to wane, the footsteps growing fainter until they vanished entirely. The house in Nome remained a beautiful sanctuary, its dark past acknowledged and respected. The basement, once a chamber of frozen despair, became a space of remembrance and healing. Yet, on the coldest winter nights, when the wind howls through the trees and the snow blankets the world in silence, I sometimes catch a faint echo of footsteps below, a subtle reminder of the lives lost and the spirits who found their peace. Our experience taught us the importance of remembering and honoring the past. No matter how painful, the house stands as a testament to resilience and the enduring power of compassion. A reminder that even in the coldest depths, warmth and understanding can bring light to the darkest corners. Story number 2. the pit that consumes. Moving to Ketchikan was supposed to be a new beginning for me. After years of working in bustling Anchorage, the quieter life in Southeast Alaska appealed to my desire for solitude and a fresh start. I found work as a contractor, taking on various projects to renovate older buildings in the area. Little did I know, my latest assignment at the Old Seafarers Hotel would plunge me into a nightmare far beyond my worst fears. The Seafarers Hotel stood on the edge of town, its once grand facade now marred by time and neglect. Built in the early 1900s, it had served as lodging for miners and travelers seeking fortune in the nearby gold fields. By the 1930s, the hotel had fallen into disrepair, eventually shutting its doors under mysterious circumstances that locals rarely discussed. Rumors whispered of dark deeds and restless spirits, but I dismissed them as mere folklore until I experienced it myself. One chilly October morning, I arrived at the hotel to begin the renovation of its basement. The building's structure was sound, but the basement had suffered significant water damage and infestation. My job was to repair the flooring, reinforce the walls, and install a new ventilation system, equipped with tools, materials, and a sense of determination. I descended the creaky wooden stairs into the dimly lit space. The basement was cold, far colder than I had anticipated. Even for Alaska's harsh winters, I set up my workspace, spreading out the materials and starting to dismantle the damaged floorboards. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay, making it difficult to breathe. I tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine, focusing instead on the task at hand. As the morning wore on, I made progress, tearing up the old floor and exposing the subfloor beneath. It was then that I heard it, a faint, sorrowful crying coming from beneath the wood. At first, I thought it was the wind sneaking through the cracks, but the sound grew louder, more distinct, as if someone or something was trying to communicate. "Hello? Is someone there?" I called out, my voice echoing in the hollow basement. The crying paused, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on me. Shaking off the chill, I resumed my work, dismissing the noise as a figment of my imagination. But the sounds returned, more insistent this time. I felt a shiver run down my spine, the hairs on my arms standing on end. "I'm not leaving until I find out what's causing that noise," I muttered to myself, trying to muster the courage to investigate further. Carefully, I lifted the remaining floorboards, revealing a deep, dark hole beneath. My flashlight beam pierced the darkness, illuminating the gaping void. It seemed bottomless, swallowing the light and leaving me with a sense of vertigo. The crying had ceased, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence that felt almost tangible. "Get out of here," a voice whispered, barely audible but unmistakably human. My heart raced as I stared into the abyss, unable to comprehend what I was seeing or hearing. Before I could react, the ground beneath me gave way. Powerful force yanked me forward, pulling me towards the darkness below. I screamed, flailing my arms, but the grip was relentless. Just as I felt myself being swallowed by the pit, a sudden tug on my leg yanked me back to the surface. My colleagues, Mike and Sarah, who had been assisting me with the repairs, had heard my cries and rushed to my aid. "Are you okay?" Mike asked, pulling me free from the edge of the hole. My legs trembled, and I struggled to catch my breath. The image of the bottomless pit seared into my mind. I saw something down there," I gasped, my voice shaky. There were eyes, red eyes watching me. Sarah exchanged a worried glance with Mike. "Maybe it's just an animal, or some reflection," she suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. But I knew it was more than that. The basement's chill seemed to intensify, and the oppressive silence returned, broken only by the distant sounds of our hammers and saws. Determined to uncover the truth, we decided to investigate further. With renewed determination, we worked through the day, repairing the basement and attempting to seal off the mysterious hole. As night fell, the temperature dropped even further, and the basement's unnatural coldness seemed to seep into our bones. Around midnight, the crying returned, louder and more desperate. "Help us!" The voices seemed to plead, echoing from the depths below. I felt a magnetic pull towards the hole, compulsion I couldn't resist. "Guys, we need to stop," Mike warned, noticing my distraction. "This place isn't right." But curiosity gnawed at me, and I found myself descending the stairs once more, flashlight in hand. The basement was darker than before, the only light coming from the beam of my flashlight. I approached the hole cautiously, the crying growing louder, more anguished. As I leaned closer, the flashlight revealed something horrifying, a photograph, half buried in the debris at the bottom of the pit. It depicted a young woman and a boy, both smiling brightly, unaware of the fate that awaited them. The back of the photo read Eleanor and Tommy, 1924. A sudden realization hit me. Eleanor and Tommy, I whispered, connecting the dots with the local legends I had dismissed earlier. "What's that?" Sarah asked, stepping into the basement and noticing my distress. Before I could explain, the ground trembled, and the basement doors slammed shut, trapping us inside. The temperature plummeted, our breath visible in the frigid air. The crying transformed into anguished wails, filling the space with an overwhelming sense of sorrow and despair. "Help us!" The voices echoed, surrounding us from all directions. The photograph floated out of the pit, landing at my feet as if guided by an unseen force. "We need to help them," I said, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of cries. "Eleanor and Tommy were trapped here. They need closure." Mike and Sarah nodded, their fear mingling with empathy. "What can we do?" Mike asked, his voice strained. "I think we need to acknowledge their suffering, honor their memory," I replied, recalling the stories of the past. "Maybe then they can find peace." We decided to hold a memorial in the basement, creating a makeshift altar with candles and flowers. As we placed the photograph on the altar, the wails began to soften, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. We lit the candles, their flickering flames casting gentle light over the room. "Eleanor, Tommy," I began, speaking directly to the spirits. "We know what happened here. We're sorry for your suffering. Please, find peace." A profound silence followed, the temperature warming gradually as the last of the cries faded away. The basement doors swung open on their own, allowing us to leave, exhausted but hopeful. We knew that we had taken the first step in helping the lost souls of the Seafarers Hotel. The next morning, we reported our findings to the local authorities. They were skeptical but agreed to investigate further. Historical records confirmed that the hotel had been the site of several disappearances in the 1920s, victims of a ruthless man who sought to hide his ill-gotten gains by disposing of the unfortunate souls in the basement pit. Despite our efforts, the photograph and the mummified remains we had found were inexplicably missing when the police returned. It was as if they had never existed, leaving us with unanswered questions and lingering doubts. Days turned into weeks, and the basement's chill never returned. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a serene stillness that suggested Eleanor and Tommy had finally found the peace they sought. However, the experience left an indelible mark on me and my friends, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. But peace was fragile. One night, a year after our ordeal, I heard footsteps echoing from the basement once more. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. My heart raced as I realized that the spirits were still restless, their need for closure unfulfilled. Gathering my courage, I descended the stairs, flashlight in hand. The basement was as quiet as ever, the memory of that night still vivid in my mind. As I approached the pit, the temperature dropped abruptly, my breath visible in the air. "Please," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "Let us help you." The footsteps grew louder, more defined, and the basement began to shimmer with a ghostly light. The apparition of a woman and a boy appeared before me, their eyes filled with sorrow. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, her voice carrying a sense of finality. "We've been waiting for someone to remember us." With those words, the basement returned to its peaceful state, the chill dissipating completely. The spirits had finally found their peace, their restless cries silenced by acknowledgement and compassion. The Seafarers Hotel was eventually renovated and reopened, now a place of history and remembrance rather than fear. Visitors often marveled at the warmth of the basement, unaware of the dark past it once held. As for me, I carry the memory of that night with me, a testament to the power of empathy and the importance of honoring the lost. Moving forward, I never doubted the stories of restless spirits and haunted places again. The pit that once threatened to consume me became a symbol of resilience and the enduring human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest depths, compassion can bring light and peace. Story number 3. Crying Voices in the Night. Moving to Juneau, Alaska, was supposed to be a fresh start. After years of living in the relentless hustle of the city, I craved the serenity that only a remote northern town could offer. The house I found was charming in its own neglected way, a two-story relic from the early 20th century, nestled at the edge of a dense forest. Its weathered facade and creaky wooden floors whispered stories of bygone eras, stories I was eager to uncover. My name is Laura Bennett, and living alone had always suited me. I cherished the quiet, the uninterrupted moments to read, write, and simply be. However, as the first winter snow began to blanket Juneau, an unexpected chill settled over my new home, not just from the biting cold outside, but something more profound, something unseen. It started innocuously enough. Late one evening, as the wind howled outside, I heard what I initially dismissed as the house settling. But as nights turned colder, the sounds became more persistent. Soft, melancholic crying echoed from the basement, a place I seldom visited. I convinced myself it was the wind playing tricks on the old structure. But deep down, unease gnawed at me. One particularly frigid night, the crying grew louder and more distinct. It was unmistakably human, a sorrowful lament that pierced through the silence. Determined to confront whatever was haunting me, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down the narrow, creaking staircase to the basement. The air down there was frigid, colder than any other part of the house, despite the thermostat set to a comfortable temperature upstairs. My breath misted in front of me as I scanned the dimly lit space. Cobwebs draped from the rafters, and old boxes were stacked haphazardly against the walls. The crying seemed to emanate from deeper within, urging me to explore further. As I ventured toward the source, my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. In a corner, partially obscured by dust and debris, I noticed something unusual, a pile of old newspapers and forgotten memorabilia. Heart pounding, I began to sift through the clutter, hoping to uncover the source of the distressing sounds. There, buried beneath years of neglect, was an old photograph. Its edges were torn, and the colors had faded with time, but the image remained hauntingly clear. The photo depicted a young woman and a little boy, both smiling despite the obvious signs of hardship in their eyes. A date scrawled on the back read, 1924. My hands trembled as I held the picture, a chill running down my spine. Intrigued and disturbed, I decided to delve into the house's history. Local archives and elderly neighbors revealed a tragic story. In the winter of 1924, a devastating fire had swept through the house, claiming the lives of a woman named Eleanor and her young son, Thomas. The fire had been swift and merciless, leaving little time for escape. Rumors persisted that Eleanor, consumed by grief and despair, had sealed the basement doors to protect her child, ultimately leading to their untimely deaths. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the basement, the photograph clutched tightly in my hand. As I stood there, the crying began anew, this time accompanied by a faint, sorrowful whisper. Help us! The voice seemed to plead. My resolve wavered, but a sense of duty compelled me to act. I decided to give Eleanor and Thomas the peace they deserved. Carefully, I placed the photograph on a makeshift altar I had created among the boxes, surrounding it with candles and a small vase of fresh flowers. As the flames flickered, casting warm light over the somber image, the crying gradually subsided, replaced by a profound silence that felt like a weight lifted from the air. Believing my actions had appeased the restless spirits, I retreated upstairs, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. But as days passed, I began to notice lingering signs of the house's tragic past. The basement still held an icy chill, and the faint scent of smoke perpetually lingered, no matter how much I aired out the space. It was as if the very essence of the fire had embedded itself into the foundation of the house. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn once more to the basement. The familiar cold greeted me, but this time, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air felt denser, charged with an unspoken tension. I approached the altar, expecting to see the photograph and the candles still burning. To my horror, the items were gone, replaced by a thick layer of soot that marred the floor. As I stood there, processing the unsettling change, the crying began again, louder and more anguished than before. The basement seemed to react to my presence, the temperature dropping sharply, my breath turning to frost. I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and desperation emanating from the darkness. "Please, help us!" the whispers echoed, a chorus of despair that resonated deep within me. Memories of the tragic history intertwined with the present, creating a haunting tapestry of loss and longing. I realized that the spirits were not yet at peace, their anguish bound to the remnants of their untimely deaths. Determined to break the cycle of suffering, I sought guidance from a local medium, hoping to find a way to release Eleanor and Thomas from their eternal torment. The medium, a kindly woman named Margaret, listened intently as I recounted the events and shared the photograph. "These spirits are trapped by their grief," Margaret explained, her eyes distant as she communed with the unseen. "They need recognition and closure to move on. We must honor their memory and acknowledge their pain." Together, we organized a memorial service, inviting neighbors and community members to join in remembrance of Eleanor and Thomas. On a clear winter evening, we gathered in the basement, candles flickering and prayers whispered into the cold air. As we spoke words of comfort and remembrance, the atmosphere began to shift once more. The crying softened, transforming into gentle sighs of relief. The temperature rose gradually, the oppressive chill dissipating like morning mist. The lingering scent of smoke faded, replaced by a warm, comforting aroma that filled the space. It was as if the house itself exhaled, releasing the trapped sorrow that had haunted it for nearly a century. As the final prayers were spoken, a profound silence settled over the basement. The photograph, once a symbol of tragedy, now stood as a testament to love and the enduring bond between a mother and her child. The spirits of Eleanor and Thomas had finally found peace, their restless cries silenced by the acknowledgement and compassion of those who remembered their story. In the weeks that followed, the house felt lighter, the basement no longer a chamber of icy dread, but a space of reverent memory. The winter nights remained cold, but the supernatural chill had been lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and healing. The photograph remained on the altar, a cherished reminder of the night we honored the lost souls and helped them find their way home. Yet, even now, when the wind howls through the trees and the snow blankets Juno in silence, I can't help but feel a lingering connection to Eleanor and Thomas. Their story became intertwined with mine, a haunting reminder of the power of empathy and the importance of remembering those who came before us. The house stands as a sanctuary of peace, its walls echoing with the silent whispers of love and loss, forever etched into the fabric of my life. Story number 4. Shadow in the abandoned basement. I never believed in ghosts, Not until the night I ventured into the abandoned basement in Fairbanks with my friends. My name is Mark Sullivan, and what happened that night shattered my skepticism forever. It was late October, the air crisp with the first whispers of winter. My friends Jake, Emily, and Sarah had always been thrill seekers, eager to explore the forgotten corners of our small town. When we heard about the old Thompson house on the outskirts of Fairbanks, rumored to have a haunted basement, we knew we had to check it out. The Thompson house had been abandoned for decades. Built in the early 1900s, it stood as a relic of Fairbanks' past, its once grand facade now marred by neglect and time. Local legends spoke of a serial killer, Henry Thompson, who prowled the house in the 1930s, luring unsuspecting victims to the basement where he concealed their bodies. The tales were chilling, but we dismissed them as mere folklore until now. On a chilly Friday evening, armed with flashlights, camera, and an insatiable curiosity, we made our way to the house. The sun had just set, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out like dark fingers across the landscape. The house loomed before us, its windows like vacant eyes watching our every move. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her voice wavering slightly as we approached the heavy wooden door. Jake, always the bravado of the group, smirked. "Come on. It's just an old house. Besides, where's your sense of adventure?" Sarah, the most cautious of us, nodded in agreement. "We've been cooped up all week. A little exploration sounds good." With a collective breath, Jake pushed the door open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The air inside was thick with dust, and the wooden floorboards groaned under our weight as we stepped into the foyer. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like ghostly drapes, and the remnants of old furniture lay scattered around, covered in white sheets. "Let's stick together," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. "We don't know what or who we might find." We made our way through the house, our flashlights cutting swaths of light through the darkness. The main floor was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the settling house. As we explored, the stories about Henry Thompson seemed less like fiction and more like a haunting truth. "According to the old records," Jake said, flipping through a weathered notebook he found on a dusty shelf, "Henry Thompson was never caught. He disappeared one night, and no one has seen him since." Emily shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Do you think the stories are true? That he really was a serial killer?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but we're here to find out." After what felt like hours, we reached the staircase leading to the basement. The door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness beckoning us below. Jake hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, revealing a narrow, steep staircase descending into the unknown. "All right, here goes nothing," Jake muttered, grabbing his flashlight and leading the way down. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into our bones. Our flashlights barely penetrated the gloom, illuminating only a few feet ahead. The air was damp, carrying the scent of mold and something else, something metallic. "Guys, over here," Sarah called out, pointing to a corner where old crates and barrels were stacked haphazardly. As we approached, the beam of my flashlight caught something that made my blood run cold. Too small, red glimmers stared back at me from the darkness. Eyes. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Are those eyes?" Emily whispered, stepping closer. We exchanged nervous glances, our bravado melting away in the face of the unknown. "It must be an animal," Jake suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Probably just some raccoon or something," I added, though my mind raced with possibilities far more sinister. We decided to investigate, slowly making our way toward the source of the eyes. As we drew closer, the red glow seemed to intensify, reflecting off the surfaces around us. The eyes were no longer small but belonged to a towering, shadowy figure that loomed menacingly in front of us. Before we could react, the figure moved toward us with an unnatural grace, its form shifting and twisting in the dim light. Panic surged through me as I took a step back, tripping over a loose floorboard and falling to the ground. "Run!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. We turned on our heels, sprinting up the stairs and out of the basement as fast as our legs could carry us. The house seemed to come alive, doors slamming shut and windows rattling as if something was trying to trap us inside. We burst into the foyer, gasping for breath, hearts hammering in our chests. "What the hell was that?" Emily cried, clutching her flashlight. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Jake replied, pulling the rest of us toward the front door. As we reached the door, I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my eye. I looked down to see a long scratch running across my eyelid, oozing blood. "Something's wrong," I gasped, stumbling backward. "Mark, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with concern. I think I was scratched," I managed to say, trying to touch my face despite the pain. "Come on, let's go," Jake urged, pulling me toward the door. We didn't stop until we were a safe distance away from the house, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The basement incident left us shaken. But what truly terrified me was the scratch on my eye, a mark that hadn't healed since that night. The following days were a blur of fear and unanswered questions. I couldn't shake the image of those red eyes and the shadowy figure. When I showed Jake the scratch, his face went pale. "That place has a dark history," he said, his voice trembling. "Local legends say Henry Thompson was a serial killer who preyed on travelers in the 1930s. He was never caught, and some believe his spirit still haunts the old house." Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "We need to tell someone. We can't keep this to ourselves." We reached out to the local authorities, sharing our terrifying experience. The police dismissed it as a figment of our imagination, fueled by old stories and the stress of the night. But we knew what we saw, what we felt was real. Determined to uncover the truth, we delved into the history of the Thompson house. Old newspaper clippings revealed a string of disappearances in the 1930s, all linked to Henry Thompson. He was a reclusive man, rumored to have violent tendencies. The basement had been used to conceal his victims, their remains never found despite extensive searches. As we pieced together the grim past, strange occurrences began to follow us. Objects moved on their own, whispers echoed in the dead of night, and the feeling of being watched never left us. It was as if Henry Thompson's spirit was reaching out, desperate to share his story. One evening, I decided to return to the house alone, driven by a need to understand. Armed with a flashlight and the resolve to confront whatever lingered, I stepped back into the abandoned home. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence oppressive. Descending the stairs once more, I felt the familiar chill envelop me. As I reached the basement, the red eyes appeared again, glowing fiercely in the darkness. But this time, there was no figure, only the eyes, watching me with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. "Henry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What do you want?" The air grew colder, and the whispers began, echoing the same desperate plea I had heard that night. "Remember us. Don't forget." I realized then that Henry Thompson's spirit was bound to the house by the pain and suffering he had caused. To free him, we had to acknowledge his victims and give them the recognition they deserved. Returning to town, we organized a memorial for the lost souls of the Thompson house. Local historians and descendants of the victims attended, sharing stories and honoring their memory. As we laid flowers and lit candles, the oppressive atmosphere of the house seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace. That night, I returned to the basement one final time. The red eyes were gone, replaced by a calm silence. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The scratch on my eye faded, a reminder of the night we faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The Thompson house still stands on the outskirts of Fairbanks, this haunted past now acknowledged and remembered. But the shadows have receded, and the whispers have turned to whispers of gratitude. Our experience taught us that some places carry the weight of history, and to honor the past is to pave the way for healing. While the house remains a relic of fear, it now stands as a testament to the resilience of those who remember and the power of facing our darkest fears together. Story number 5. Whispers from the Cold Basement. Moving to Anchorage, Alaska, was a decision that changed everything for our family. My name is Jack Thompson, and I still remember the day we stepped into our new home, a weathered, two-story house nestled on the outskirts of the city. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of fresh beginnings. My wife, Laura, and our 2 children, Emily and Ethan, were excited about the adventure that lay ahead. Little did we know, our dream home held secrets that would chill us to the bone. From the moment we moved in, there was something unsettling about the basement. No matter how high we set the heater, an unnatural coldness lingered below. We chalked it up to the Alaskan winters, convincing ourselves that the old house needed time to warm up. But as days turned into weeks, the basement remained stubbornly frigid, its temperature defying logic. One evening, as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, I decided to investigate the basement further. Laura was busy unpacking in the living room, and the children were engrossed in their new toys. With a flashlight in hand, I descended the creaky wooden stairs, the chill greeting me like an unwelcome guest. The basement was sparse, just a few old boxes and tools scattered around. Yet, the cold was palpable, seeping into my bones despite the heater's best efforts. As I stood there, shivering, I noticed something odd. My breath formed a dense mist in the air, despite the house being adequately heated above. Puzzled, I glanced around, trying to find the source of this anomaly. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, calling my name from the darkness. Jack! I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper came again, more insistent this time, echoing off the damp walls. Jack! I strained my ears, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. The basement was empty, save for the cold that seemed to wrap around me like icy fingers. Summoning my courage, I called out, "Who's there?" Silence answered me, thick and suffocating. I took a hesitant step forward, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The whispers persisted, growing louder and more desperate. "Help me, Jack!" A chill ran down my spine as I realized the basement was trying to communicate with me. Memories of old family stories about the house resurfaced, tales of its past occupants and the hardships they endured during the early days of Anchorage's settlement. But nothing had ever hinted at the basement being anything more than a storage space. Determined to uncover the truth, I began searching the basement more thoroughly. Behind a stack of old tarps, I discovered a hidden door, cleverly concealed and long forgotten. My hands trembled as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway leading further into the house. The temperature dropped even more abruptly, my breath misting heavily as I ventured inside. The passage was cramped and suffocating, the walls damp with moisture. As I moved forward, the whispers became clearer, forming words that sent shivers down my spine. "Remember us, don't forget." At the end of the passageway, I found a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the temperature was unbearably cold. In the center stood an old wooden chair, the surface worn and splintered. Surrounding it were remnants of a grim history, rusted chains, broken shackles, and remnants of old prison uniforms. It was then that the horrifying truth dawned on me. The basement had once been used as a makeshift prison during Anchorage's early frontier days. Images flashed before my eyes, prisoners chained to the walls, their faces etched with despair as they succumbed to the relentless cold and starvation. The room seemed to come alive with their lingering spirits, their whispers a haunting reminder of their suffering. "Free us, remember our pain." I stumbled back, my mind racing to process the revelation. The cold wasn't just a quirk of the old house. It was a manifestation of the anguish and torment that had transpired here. The spirits of those who had perished in this basement were still trapped, their sorrow and rage creating an eternal winter that no heater could thaw. Determined to help, I decided to bring Laura into the basement. Together, we faced the chilling reality of our home's dark past. As we stood in the frozen room, the temperature plummeted further, and the whispers intensified, now accompanied by faint, sorrowful wails. The spirits seemed restless, their unresolved anguish seeking closure. We reached out, attempting to communicate with the trapped souls. "We're here to help," I called out, my voice trembling. "Tell us what you need." A collective sigh filled the room, and the air shimmered with an otherworldly energy. One spirit, a woman with hollow eyes and a tear-streaked face, stepped forward. "Remember us, tell our story." Realizing the importance of honoring their memory, we vowed to uncover the full extent of the basement's history. Research led us to old town records and forgotten journals, revealing the grim reality of the basement's past. During the harsh winters of the early 1900s, Anchorage was a fledgling settlement grappling with isolation and scarcity. To manage the burgeoning population, the local authorities repurposed the basement as a holding cell for those who broke the law. Conditions were dire. The prisoners endured extreme cold, minimal rations, and brutal treatment. Many perished from exposure or malnutrition, their bodies left to rot in the dank confines of the basement. Their restless spirits were bound to the place, unable to move on due to the trauma they had endured. Armed with this knowledge, we sought to bring peace to the tortured souls. We enlisted the help of local historians and spiritual guides, performing a cleansing ritual to honor the memory of those who had suffered. As we chanted prayers and lit candles, the temperature began to rise, the oppressive cold giving way to a sense of calm. The whispers gradually faded, replaced by a serene silence. The spirits seemed to release their grip on the basement, their suffering finally acknowledged and remembered. A warmth settled over the room, dispelling the lingering chill and filling the space with a comforting presence. In the weeks that followed, the basement's temperature normalized, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Our home felt lighter, free from the shadows of its past. The experience bonded our family in ways we couldn't have imagined, instilling a deep respect for the history that shapes the places we call home. Yet, late at night, when the wind howls outside and the snow blankets the world in silence, I sometimes catch a faint whisper on the breeze, a soft, lingering echo of gratitude from those who were finally freed from their eternal winter. Thank you. The house stands as a testament to resilience and the power of remembering. We learned that acknowledging the pain of the past is essential to healing, both for the living and the lost. Our basement, once a chamber of suffering, became a sanctuary of peace, reminding us that every story deserves to be heard and every soul to be remembered.